Hi everyone, I'm Nabilah. I'm a playwright, editor, theatre critic, and a poet. I'm currently the editor of Arts Equator. We're a website that covers the arts in Singapore and the rest of Southeast Asia. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak to you tonight. Now, depending on who you ask, I am in or was from the dark side. I was formerly with the Straits Times as an arts correspondent where I covered theatre and dance as well as the heritage and lifestyle beat. I was also in an events and PR agency where I managed Noise Singapore under NEC. I've worked in the government where I was with the National Heritage Board, and then later I joined Singapore Art Museum where I became well acquainted with contemporary art as well. I graduated from SMU with a business and accountancy degree, which means I'm the rare artist who loves Excel. Yes, we exist. So I call myself like an insider outsider. Earlier this year in June, I was actually invited by playwright academic Tan Tan Hao to speak at an IPS forum about art in a time of the pandemic. That was in June, but it feels super long ago. It was actually one of the hardest things that I've had to do. Firstly, because I'm not always invited to the room. But the other aspect of it was that there were policymakers in the audience, and it was I had to be a bit strategic about how I was talking about the arts. The speech was called Intimate Truths and Performance Anxieties. So I talked about anxieties that we were feeling as artists who have been simultaneously displaced by the pandemic and yet also expected to miraculously land on our feet. And then there's this fundamental trauma that has been resurfacing during the pandemic, the one that questions the value of arts and hence the value of artists to Singapore. I also referenced two events in our performance art history where I saw the arts and the country staring each other in the eye. One was when Tang Da Wu wore a jacket that says, "Don't give money to the arts" in 1995. He also passed then President Ong Teng Cheong a letter that said, "I'm an artist, I'm important." This was during the time when performance art was not allowed in Singapore. Later in 2013, visual artist Zaki Razak would reference that event in a name card that he gave to then President Tony Tan. It said, "I am not an artist. I am not important." Those were examples of artists directly interacting with country, attempting to articulate the importance of artists at a certain point in time. So in this time of a pandemic, what would we say to the state if we could look at it in the face? This is where I think I can offer myself as the arts NMP. But what can I do? I can speak, I can listen, and I can serve. Drawing on my practice in journalism, criticism, communication, and engagement, as arts NMP, I'm interested in deeply listening to your voices. And I'm completely aware that I do not and I will not know everything. And I will need actually the help, support, and collaboration of all of you in the arts. And then I think it's about reflecting back a considered calibration of all these issues on a national stage. So like my other colleagues who have spoken before me, top of the list is definitely working with policymakers to come up with a kind of roadmap to manage the impact of the pandemic on artists. You know, it's been almost a year and things have improved, but they've also not. How do we deal with job losses and the loss of livelihood? I have friends who have left the industry, freelancers who have left perhaps temporarily and perhaps not. And I would like to honor that and hope that we can rebuild ourselves to a point where maybe they can come back. As a freelancer myself, I'm actually wondering about the protection that we as arts freelancers have and how to better safeguard ourselves as a sector. It is also about looking at what we currently have. For example, what the Arts Resource Hub and other players can contribute to this discussion. The second big question for me is actually audience recultivation and thinking about how we can improve access to the arts and to our work. So for example, for parents and caregivers, for those who can't leave their homes, those who are outside of Singapore, and those who can't afford a ticket. These are not new considerations, but perhaps we can look at them anew. I would also like to address deep and systemic issues plaguing the industry. For example, how can we articulate the intrinsic value of arts and culture in a way that all Singaporeans can understand and resonate with? It sounds simple, but it's really not. And then there's also the loss of space for the arts and the effects of that in real terms and what it does to our psyche. Within the industry, I'm also interested in fixing what is broken, what is perhaps been allowed to fester, all the little micro tears that we've learned to live with over the years. I'm currently part of a good practices working group for Singapore theatre. Earlier in the year, we spoke to about 100 practitioners about practices currently being done in the industry that may be unhealthy, unsustainable, or maybe exploitative. I wrote a paper of recommendations that was about 60 pages long. It's a lot of recommendations that will soon be released. But it's not all about what we as artists can do. It's also about what the government can do and what is systemic. I actually think we need to do this for all the other art forms as well and start a conversation about how we can treat ourselves and those around us that we work with in a way that's more caring, ethical, and sustainable. This is care work and healing work that I think is long overdue. And we don't need to wait until the pandemic is long over to look at these things. Given my positionality as a young Malay woman and an artist, I will also speak up for minority and disenfranchised communities. I believe in a more equal, accessible, and compassionate Singapore, and I will speak to that in Parliament whenever I can. As an arts critic, I will continue to use my words to critically examine what is before me. Now, critics are not always welcome in society, but I take comfort in the words of Ko Pao Kun, who said that writing is probably the best way to resist a culture which attempts to make people uncritical. Just like writing can be an act of resistance, speaking up is too. So is art making. We are all trying to make our country better. Loving our country while trying to show people what Singapore can be, this surely is an act of patriotism. Now, as an educator who has taught in art schools and secondary schools around Singapore, I'm very interested in nurturing the voices of the younger generation and helping them become active citizens interested in shaping our collective future. We don't need to wait for the GE to do this. I've always believed that we can learn from the courage of our youth, that it's never too late to seize the opportunity to change the world. Now, as I reach the end of my speech, permit me to indulge in an act of speculation. Were I to meet President Halimah Yacob, what would I say to her about the arts? Where would I start? Because there are a lot of deep-seated anxieties and trauma, where ideally there should be none. I'm not saying we need to just smooth over the tension, because I feel like beauty and creativity can come out of tension. But maybe I'll tell her that a thriving, critical, socially engaged art scene should be seen as a badge of honor for any modern, progressive society. Or maybe I'll tell her that of how I almost thought of leaving the industry. Just a few weeks ago, I felt like I was losing hope. I couldn't really envision what I was meant to do in the arts, and I thought, wow, maybe it's a sign. And the thought was actually immensely saddening. And then someone actually put my name forward as arts NMP, and suddenly, even though it had never been something that I ever dreamt that I could do, suddenly I felt it. Hope. So what would it mean for an artist, a woman, and a member of the minority to be in Parliament? I can tell you that it'll mean a lot. I've never run for anything like this in my life. I've spoken to the other ex-arts NMPs to see what the role requires. Who is the perfect candidate? I was trying to be very kanchiong and study. But I realized very quickly that the role is what you make of it. You bring your entire self to Parliament and you try to speak truth to power. And you do your very best to uplift your community. So whatever it is I say to President Halimah or to any other parliamentarian and policymaker in this land, I have to choose my words very carefully. Because I want her and the country to really hear us, to really see us. Thank you very much and all the best to my fellow candidates.